Alrighty, so we have been practicing our constraints on UI views, but now let's look at other UI elements like in our login screen we made a while back. Now all the same rules apply that we learned in the last few lessons, and I want you to try this on your own before I go through it with you. What we want to do is pin the labels at the top and set width and heights, or pin to the left and right of super view, it's up to you. Do that for the label, for the text fields, and then do the same for the button at the bottom. Basically, it should look more or less like it does now, but will stay that way for all the other device screens as well. All right, so pause this, give it a try, and then we'll go through it together. Alrighty, let's go through this together now. When I am adding constraints and laying things out, I try to look for a dividing point, and I will split it into a top half and a bottom half. The top half will get constrained to the top and the bottom half to the bottom. This is a pretty obvious split, so I'm going to start with the top label here. I'm going to go ahead and pin it to the top, and 24 is fine. I'm going to add that constraint, and then I'm going to pin it horizontally in container, okay? And I'm going to add that constraint. Now you might notice something unexpected. With just those two constraints, this is fully constrained. We can see that it has the blue lines. But what about width and height? Well, there are some exceptions to that rule. A UI label can have a set width and height, but it doesn't need them to be fully constrained. If the size of the text grows, then it is simply going to expand into the left and right regions. Okay? But you won't have any control over what is shown really. Okay, I'm going to Command Z that a couple times. Okay, so this is fully constrained, but if you want to make sure that it has a fixed width, then you can do that. You can, oops, wrong one. You can set it a fixed width of 210, for instance. I'm going to add that constraint. But then if the text grows, I'm just going to add some nonsense to the end of that. You'll see here that the label doesn't grow, it simply truncates the end of it, okay? I'm gonna Command Z that again. All right, so there is our UI label, fully constrained. Now let's take a look at our text fields here. Here again, you have a couple of options. You could set a fixed width, or you could constrain it to the edges. I'm gonna constrain it to the edges. I'm gonna pin it to the label above. I'm gonna set it 20 from there. And then I'm going to say 20 from the left and right as well. So this is going to expand and stretch with increasing device size. Let's add those three constraints. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing with password. I'm going to go ahead and place it 12, pin it 12 from the bottom of the username text field. And then I'm going to say 20 from the left and 20 from the right. And then we're going to add those three constraints. And now that is fully constrained. All right, so we have constrained our first three elements. Now, how about this login button? All right, so you might think, okay, I'm going to constrain this 454 from the bottom of the password. Problem is, if you do that, and then you switch to a smaller screen, it's going to be constrained off of the screen size, okay? So that's why I was saying try to find a split and then constrain the top to the top and the bottom to the bottom. All right, so I'm going to remove that constraint, and instead we are going to pin it to the bottom. Okay, it's going to pin it 20 from the bottom, and I'm going to add a height constraint. I usually like to make my buttons a little bit taller. Let's go 40, and I'm going to say add those two constraints. And then I'm going to pin it 20 from the left and 20 from the right. I'm going to add those two constraints. All right, let's see how that looks. Let's change the device sizes. So I'm going to go down to a 4S. Hey, looks good. Let's go up to an iPad. Zoom out here. All right, that still looks pretty good. Now, so this is why I was kind of saying you have some options with your text fields. This might look kind of strange with it stretching so far. So there are some more advanced things that we can do that we'll cover a little bit later on in the course, but I mean, it looks okay. And let's see what it looks like in landscape. Looks good, looks good. All right, let's jump back down to, say, our iPhone 10. All right, that looks real good. And in portrait mode, it also looks good. Now I'm going to bring up something that might be controversial, but I rarely see the need to support landscape mode unless your app is like a gaming app or you actually really need landscape mode. I think portrait mode is fine. And I was curious to see how many of the apps on my phone support landscape. So I went through a whole bunch of them and tested to see which ones supported landscape. And only like less than half support landscape. So it's not like not supporting landscape is going to, ruin the experience for your users, okay? So my advice would be, if you don't have to have landscape support, don't do it. And the way to fix that, if you don't want to support landscape, if you come into your project up here, and right here under deployment info, if you uncheck landscape left and right, then it will only work in portrait. Be warned though that if you are selecting universal, meaning that you're going to develop for iPad and iPhone, iPad requires that you support landscape mode, okay? So just be aware of that. All right, so everything we covered in the past several lessons is going to get you about probably 75% of the way to anything that you need to do in AutoLayout. In the next couple of lessons, we are going to learn about another very useful AutoLayout tool called Stack Views that will help things even a little bit further along, all right? So I'll see you in the next one when we discuss Stack Views.